The wind bit like a physical blow across the high plains, whipping dust and forgotten snow into a blinding frenzy. Elijah Thorne cinched his jacket tighter, the familiar ache in his joints a dull companion to the biting cold. His ranch wasn't much, a weathered clapboard house, a sturdy barn, corrals holding lean cattle, but it was his, carved out of unforgiving land. He'd lived alone here for 15 years, a man who preferred the company of the wind and the lowing herd to the gossip and judgment of the distant town. Tonight, the barn called him early, a restless steer needing checking. He pushed open the heavy timber door, the wind howling past him into the sudden, relative stillness within. The air inside was thick with the scent of hay, manure, and something else, something that tightened the muscles in his back. He moved slowly, his eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through the cracks in the walls. Then he saw them. Tucked deep in the hay, huddled together like a small, injured litter, were 4 children, asleep. Their faces were smudged with dirt, their clothes ragged and thin against the cold. And beside them, half-hidden, lay a woman. She was still, too still, her breathing shallow and ragged. A dark stain bloomed on the rough fabric of her dress near her side. Fear, sharp and sudden, lanced through Elijah, not for himself, but for the fragility laid bare before him. He'd seen death, seen hardship, but never this utter helplessness arrived on his doorstep, small and numerous. He knelt slowly, cautiously. The woman's face was pale, etched with exhaustion and pain even in unconsciousness. Her hair, the color of dried wheat, was matted with sweat and dust. One hand was curled protectively towards the children. They were small. The eldest couldn't be more than 7. The youngest barely more than a babe bundled in a threadbare shawl. The silence in the barn, broken only by the wind outside and the woman's gasps, was heavy with their story. A story of flight, of desperation, of terrible vulnerability in a world that offered little mercy. His first instinct was caution, the ingrained wariness of a solitary man. Who were they? What trouble did they carry? But looking at the children's trusting, sleeping faces, and the woman's evident suffering, the instinct for survival warred with something deeper, older. Compassion. Responsibility. This land stripped a man down to his core, and in Elijah's core was a quiet, unyielding decency forged by years of facing the elements alone. He couldn't leave them. Not like this. The wind screamed its disapproval outside, rattling the barn walls, but inside, a decision solidified, quiet and resolute. He had to help. He rose slowly, his movements deliberate. The steer was forgotten. The world outside, with its cold indifference and prying eyes, could wait. For now, there was only the hushed urgency of this small, fragile encampment in his barn, and the silent promise he made to the cold air he would see to them. He needed fire, water, clean bandages. Things a lone man on the plains kept scarce, but essential now. The night had just begun. Elijah worked with a quiet efficiency born of solitude and necessity. He fetched blankets, thick woolen things smelling of wood smoke and storage. He built a small fire in the corner of the barn, carefully banking it to provide warmth without smoke. He warmed water, cleaned the woman's wound as best he could, a deep cut along her ribs, likely from a fall or a sharp blow, and bound it with strips of clean cloth torn from an old shirt. She stirred but did not wake, murmuring indistinguishable words that sounded like pleas. The children remained asleep, oblivious to the quiet ministrations happening beside them. He gave them each a sip of water from a tin cup, and the eldest boy, with eyes that were too large and too knowing, looked at him silently before gratefully drinking. He offered them dry jerky and hardtack, simple, long-lasting food. They ate slowly, watching him with that same unnerving silence. There was no playful chatter, no childish questions, only a profound, watchful quiet that spoke volumes of the fear they carried. By morning, the woman, Eleanor, was conscious, though weak. Her eyes, a startlingly clear blue against her pallor, were wary, assessing. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice raspy. "Elijah Thorne," he replied, his voice low, non-threatening. "This is my barn. You're safe here, for now safe." The word hung in the air, fragile as spun glass. Eleanor's gaze flickered to her children, huddled close under the blankets he'd provided. "Thank you," she breathed, the words costing her visible effort. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. He saw the exhaustion, the fear, the fierce maternal instinct in her eyes. He simply brought more water, checked the bandage, and left her to rest. Over the next few days, a silent routine established itself. Elijah brought food stew, biscuits, fresh milk from his cow. He kept the fire going. He tended her wound, his touch surprisingly gentle. Dialogue was minimal, functional. "Are you hungry? Does it hurt? The children need water." Eleanor spoke little of how she came to be there, or who she was running from. But her eyes, when they met his, held a depth of suffering he recognized. He saw the way her body tensed at sudden sounds, the way she flinched if he moved too quickly. He saw the quiet burden she carried, the weight of 4 small lives depending solely on her broken strength. His initial caution hadn't vanished, but it was tempered by observation. She was no outlaw, no threat. She was a woman, hurt and desperate, protecting her young. The children, still mostly silent, began to lose some of their fear, venturing small smiles, accepting his offerings with less trepidation. The eldest boy, Thomas, occasionally helped Elijah with small chores, stacking wood, fetching water, his small hands capable. Trust was a slow, fragile thing, built not on words, but on shared silence, consistent actions, and the undeniable reality of their mutual need in this isolated place. Elijah provided the physical safety, the shelter against the relentless wind and potential human storms. Eleanor, in her quiet determination to recover and protect her family, brought a quiet pulse of life to his solitary existence. The world outside remained unaware of the sanctuary in his barn, but the fragility of their peace felt immense, balanced precariously against the unknown forces that had driven them here. The fragile peace couldn't last forever. Word traveled, as it always did, even across miles of empty prairie. A lone woman for children, seen heading west away from somewhere. Descriptions were vague at first, then sharpened. A woman with wheat-colored hair, a noticeable limp, a fierce protectiveness. Rumors, thin and sharp as barbed wire, began to wrap around the edges of Elijah Thorne's isolated ranch. Why would a man like Thorne take in strangers? He kept to himself. He didn't take kindly to visitors. Suspicion, the default setting of small, isolated communities, began to simmer in the nearby town of Redemption Creek. Preacher Silas, whose sermons often railed against outsiders and the godless wilderness, spoke darkly from the pulpit about vagrants and the dangers they brought. Sheriff Brody, a man more interested in keeping the peace by avoiding trouble than confronting it, rode out to Thorne's place. He found Elijah splitting wood, his movements slow and steady, his face unreadable. "Thorne," Brody said, not dismounting. "Here you got company." Elijah paused, resting the axe head on the chopping block. His gaze, level and unwavering, met the sheriff's. "They needed shelter. Woman's injured. Kids are small." Brody shifted in his saddle. "Injured, you say? How?" "Fell," Elijah said, the lie smooth, practiced. Brody's eyes narrowed slightly, but he saw no sign of struggle, no hiding. Just the usual stoic Thorne, surrounded by his silent land. Still, the sheriff lingered, his gaze sweeping towards the barn, then the house. "There's talk in town," he warned. "Folks are uneasy about strangers, especially folks with a past." Eleanor, hidden inside the house with her children, heard the horses, the low rumble of male voices. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her recovery had been slow, but steady, aided by Elijah's quiet care and the simple nourishment he provided. She could walk now without his support, though her side still ached. Her fear hadn't diminished, only sharpened, focused into a desperate need to protect her children from the world that had broken her. She knew the past Sheriff Brody hinted at. It wasn't just hers. but the dark shadow of the man she had fled. She saw the judgment in the eyes of the few townspeople she'd accidentally encountered on the edge of Redemption Creek before she found Thorne's place. Suspicion. Coldness. Thorne had offered a fragile wall against that world. But his wall was only as strong as his reputation, and bringing her kind of trouble here could shatter it. She couldn't stay forever, she knew that. But leaving meant exposing her children to the elements again, and potentially to the man who pursued her. Her gaze fell upon her children's faces that were starting to show glimpses of childish joy, laughter beginning to return to their voices under Thorne's roof. She clenched her fists. She wouldn't let that world break them too. She wouldn't be the victim anymore. A new strength, born of desperation and Thorne's quiet, unexpected protection, was hardening within her, turning fear into resolve. The town's judgment, Sheriff Brody's warning, the looming threat, they were converging. The time for hiding was ending. She had to face it. The day the stagecoach arrived from the east, stopping unexpectedly in Redemption Creek, the whispers turned to shouts. A man, dressed in city clothes but with the look of someone hardened by travel and impatience, stepped down, asking questions, showing a faded photograph. A woman for children. The description was exact. Word spread like wildfire. They were here for her. He rode out to Thorne's ranch, flanked by a couple of townsmen emboldened by his presence and their own self-righteous suspicion. Sheriff Brody followed reluctantly, obligated by law but uneasy. He found Elijah standing in front of his house, not with a rifle, but simply standing, solid and immovable. Beside him, slight but unyielding, stood Eleanor. Her face was pale, but her blue eyes held a fire that stopped the approaching men short. The children were visible in the doorway behind her, small faces wide with apprehension. The man from the stagecoach dismounted, his expression a mixture of triumph and malice. "Eleanor," he said, his voice cold. "You didn't think you could run forever." Eleanor stepped slightly forward, away from Elijah's side, claiming her ground. "Leave us be, Robert. We want nothing from you." Robert laughed, a harsh sound. "Nothing? You stole my children, Eleanor. You abandoned your place." "My place was a cage," she countered, her voice trembling but steady. "And they are my children," the townsman muttered, shifting uneasily. This wasn't the cowering, helpless woman they'd expected. This was defiance. Robert took a step towards her, his hand reaching out. Before he could touch her, Elijah moved, not with a gun drawn, but stepping between them, his presence a quiet, formidable barrier. He didn't say a word, just stood there, his gaze steady, his body language radiating a calm, absolute refusal to let this man pass. It was a silent challenge, not of violence, but of unwavering protection. Robert faltered, surprised. The townsmen behind him exchanged uncertain glances. Sheriff Brody, watching the quiet, stoic rancher standing against the well-dressed outsider and the town's expectations, felt a shift. He saw not just a woman being defended, but a man defending principle, defending sanctuary. He cleared his throat. "Robert," he said, his voice firm, "seems she's here by her own will. And Thorne here isn't causing any trouble." Robert sputtered, outraged. "She's my wife. They're my children. Legally speaking," Brody said slowly, looking at Eleanor, "unless there's charges, folks got a right to be where they're welcome. And seems they're welcome here." The standoff held. The townsman looked at Elijah, then at Eleanor, then at the resolute sheriff. They saw not the expected narrative of a lone woman needing rescue or capture, but an unexpected tableau. A woman who had found her strength, a man who had quietly offered his protection, and a lawman who chose decency over prejudice. Stunned silence fell over the group. This wasn't how it was supposed to happen. Robert, seeing the unified front and the withdrawal of local support, his face contorted with rage, finally backed down, spitting threats before mounting his horse and riding away. The townsmen dispersed, their certainty shaken. What had stunned the whole town wasn't just Eleanor's presence or Robert's arrival, but Elijah Thorne's quiet stand, and the undeniable, visible bond of protection and trust that had formed between the solitary rancher and the desperate woman. In that moment, the isolation of Thorne's ranch had become something else entirely. A home, a sanctuary built on resilience and the quiet, unwavering courage of two people who had found refuge in each other against the harshness of the world. Eleanor watched Robert disappear, her breath coming in ragged gasps. When he was gone, she turned to Elijah. There were no grand declarations, no effusive thanks. Just her eyes, filled with a depth of gratitude and understanding that needed no words. He met her gaze, a faint, almost imperceptible nod acknowledging their shared moment, their shared victory. The harsh wind still blew, the prairie remained unforgiving, but in the quiet space between them, surrounded by the watchful silence of her children, a different kind of warmth had taken root. Eleanor, broken and fleeing, had found not just shelter, but the courage to stand, supported by the man who had seen her not as a burden, but as someone worth protecting. And Elijah Thorne, the solitary rancher, had found a purpose, a connection that shattered his isolation and redefined the quiet strength he possessed. The future was uncertain, the road ahead undoubtedly difficult, but they would face it together, a testament to the unexpected homes forged in the crucible of hardship and the profound resilience of the human spirit.